Welcome back to the Grant Writing Experts podcast. Today's guest is Deahna Moore, a freelance financial expert who blends nonprofit finance and grant writing to help organizations thrive. In our conversation, Deahna shares why financial literacy is essential for nonprofit success, the biggest budgeting challenges she sees organizations facing, and how storytelling plays a powerful role in the numbers. She dives into the importance of cross-department collaboration, reframes the budget as a living document, and clears up common misconceptions about capacity building grants. Let's get into it. So, Deanna, thank you for taking the time to join us today and share everything about grant writing and nonprofit finance from all the different angles. To give our listeners a sense of your journey, can you share more about you, your work, and how you got involved in grant writing and nonprofit finance?
Yeah. So a little bit about me. I feel like I always go into this with the intensity. There's little, but there's so much to me. I'm third generation entrepreneur, so my family definitely paved the way to see where I'm at today. I've been freelance in the financial space for the last 8 years, but my background is in accounting. I went into college with the intentions of helping out my family business. We have janitorial business for the last 18 years, and it has truly helped me even when I was in college. It was a part-time job as well. And that's where I realized that we were one of many small businesses who were missing that piece to the puzzle of finance. And so that's what inspired me to go into accounting. And once I got into it, I learned like the diversity and all the things that exist in accounting. And that was the fun part for me. I have a background in everything. So I've worked in CPA buildings. I've worked in construction. I've worked on Music Row in Nashville. And I've truly been able to just kind of to get myself in everything to say I know what I love and I know what I don't love now. And that's what inspired me to also go freelance just as much. Because I've learned that I can have bigger impact when I'm by myself versus with one company. And so that's the best part to being freelance to me. Other than that, for fun, I'm constantly volunteering. I'm also on the board of Urban League in my area in Knoxville, Tennessee. And then I'm also a former AAU basketball coach, former Girl Scout leader. And I've always been involved in making sure the next generation understands financial literacy is important. And so that's honestly what started the brand of Budgets by Joy. It started out educating my roommate because she was already scrolling already. And I just put it right in front of her so she couldn't miss it. And it started a lot more into that for realizing not everybody understands budgets, not everybody understands what grants are. And that was the best part of just kind of creating a social space of teaching so many people, but it also introduced me to a lot of clients. And so in the midst of that, I've had quite a few nonprofit clientele where I came in with the financial plan, but we realized early on that they need the grants, they need the money more than just making sure the money can be handled once it comes in the door. And so my focus kind of shifted as their CFO or their financial expert in mind that I met them where they were instead of kind of leading them to the next point where I thought they could go. So that is kind of the best part of so many things. But another thing that I've done since in the last couple of years is build a program with nonprofits who have housing assistance. And I add in the financial literacy piece. So a lot of times we're not creating systems for it to end. And that's my goal is where they can come in, get educated and not have to be always part of the system. So they come in, they're required to have that conversation monthly with me about budgeting, make sure their money is being handled properly, especially if they're getting an extra check in hand. For housing, they are required to have that conversation with me, making sure they're doing duly they're doing their justice with the money. And then we also had a savings plan to go along with that. So they were also pouring into their savings. And after the year, I think we had over $20,000 in savings with a full group of everybody. And it was delegated by what they saved in that time frame. But it's just being part of everybody's financial story is always a beautiful part of just being Budgets by Joy and everything I've built so far. So yeah, that's just a little bit. There's a lot of it.
Yeah, it's awesome. There's a lot to dig into there. Can you help us better understand the organizations that you work with? Who do you primarily support through Budgets by Joy? And yeah, who do you support?
Yeah, so I guess my main clientele is going to be the person who has a passion, but they're not sure how to turn that passion into a real business aspect. And a lot of times the nonprofit person started with just one person in mind, and they were like, well, I'd rather have a nonprofit than an LLC. but they don't know all the things that kind of go behind the door. I'm making sure that they're doing their annual reports and doing all the things and keeping up with what they are supposed to keep up with, because those grants coming in the door, they want to make sure you're handling that funds properly. And so that's the fun part for me as well, just knowing that we talked about it before the money even came in the door. So when it comes to the delegation of the money, we knew exactly how that money was going to be delegated as soon as it came into the bank account. So I'm a stickler for getting to the details of budgeting, and my clients usually have an idea, but not necessarily the big picture, especially when how much it really is going to cost them. Of even if they have security there, the extra things that they're just not thinking about. That's where I come in play, making sure that they're not missing anything. So full business development is kind of where my expertise is at. And one of my favorite clients, I would say, is because they're also youth based, and because really is part of my mission is helping out the next generation. If that client does it too, it just kind of pours that much more into my heart. So a lot of my clients are youth, faith, and or sports related.
It aligns with your background.
Yeah.
Um, that's awesome. Many nonprofits see the budget as just a spreadsheet, but you've talked about budgets as a form of storytelling. We were
Mm-hmm.
talking over email before this. What principles or philosophies guide you when making sure the budgets align with mission and the impact that they want to have?
Yeah, I think for me, it really stores down to their end goal. So a lot of times we talk about the money they need just for right now to get things going, or to have the facility, the space that they dreamed about. But not just the story overall, but also the details that make the story, the highs and the lows, like telling it all. Like that's the part where I feel like a lot of times when it comes into grants, they're just telling why, but not the how. And that's the best part of the budget. It tells them the how and goes into the nitty gritty details as much of how much that's going to cost them, who's behind it all. Do we need a sponsor? Do we need additional funds? And that's the other part of the budget, makes that more realistic, and not having people kind of get scared away from just that passion and project and play. It gets real. And once it gets real, that's usually when the fire behind the executive director becomes like even more exciting. And we get into more of each number has an intention and not just a story. And that's the best part with my holistic background as well. I'm a yogi. And so I also think about just the overall intentions of where the money is going to go once it's in the door.
What challenges do you run into when you're working with organizations crafting the budget? Are you usually on the front end of these conversations? Do you come in partway through when they're working on these applications? You said you did a lot of work on the post-award side now.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you usually come in to the conversation with your clients, and what are the challenges that you usually are up against?
I would absolutely prefer the beginning, so we don't have as many speed bumps or challenges per se. Definitely getting the starting points, making sure you're not missing how to tell the story is my ideal approach, because usually once we're past the beginning, it becomes too much of those challenges that kind of occur, where you are kind of going backstepping now, and maybe you're doing a grant pitch. The presentation doesn't match the words you created. And so those are things that like we're almost playing pickup and from not doing the things we could have done from the start.
Interesting. That's great. So one of our core topics for today is actually talking about capacity building through grants. So funding that helps with infrastructure, staffing, sustainability. Can you share a time when a nonprofit you work with successfully secured this kind of funding and what made that possible?
Yeah, honestly, it was probably the beginning of me realizing I am a grant writer and not just helping out. But I would also say the best part was sending them the link, realizing they were eligible for it all. And then they took the initiative and filled out the application. And then they came back to me and said, okay, this is where I finally need help. I got everything else filled out. But because they did have the passion behind it, they saw that they were eligible for it. They got all the things that we didn't have to double check behind scenes, that sometimes I feel like some clients don't realize that doing the little things makes it easier on our conversation later. And that's the best part, to just seeing they got a $50,000 check and seeing it hit the bank account was like, he didn't see it come real until it was in the bank. And it was kind of like that moment of like, oh, this is real. Like he can make a salary out of this. He can do more than just the simple projects that he's had created in the past. But I think it was my favorite also because he's younger than me, and he had the passion as soon as he at 16 of the vision. And so as just like I said, giving back to the next generation, just having that passion from 16 to turn around, create that initiative, reach out to me, and also let's finish it up, get it done. Even though I think it was the deadline that pushed him a little bit more because he waited till last minute. But I think sometimes for the right people, that puts the right push behind it.
Deadlines are definitely a very good motivator.
Yes.
That's great. So some organizations or even funders hesitate when it comes to budgeting or overhead or staffing. Have you ever encountered this kind of pushback on either side of the equation? And how did you navigate that conversation to still get the funding that was needed?
Yes. So I have definitely had this situation, and most of the times it comes from their own personal experience with budgeting. And that's where we kind of stem down to the root reason of why was that a hesitation? Why can we not just create a simple spreadsheet for the next, what was it, next party that we had planned? It wasn't a gala, but it was a fundraiser. And it was such a moment of they weren't ready for seeing the numbers because that was almost a scarcity aspect for them. They rather kind of they know the money's in account. They rather just swipe away and fundraisers gonna bring more money back in. And it's been so easy for them to just think about money's gonna come back to them instead of just seeing the money they already have. And that realization of just seeing that money on hand that they had gave them a whole different mentality of how they went and spent it. And so once we got past the personal um, benediction in play, it really was the fact of like, okay, now I can physically see what the holdup is. Now I'm not gonna get scared for swiping. I don't have that fear behind it. And so sometimes it really is just a mentality that they had that they were hoarding onto from their own circumstances.
That's interesting. Usually it's the other side of people worrying about it being spent incorrectly, where
Mhm.
they're worrying about spending it at all.
Yeah, and that's because because they started out from the ground zero of not having anything at all. They were just proud to have something in their account.
That's interesting. Have you ever had to make a tough call when you're building budgets with your clients and having to make priorities? I'd love to know what was going on in your mind when you're working through that.
Yes, I feel like I'm very forward of staying on the realistic train on sometimes those who are willing to be in the fantasy world. And I think that's where I'm very grounding for those who have that mentality of just cutting the ties to the balloon and just floating away with it. But I will say in the past, the decision to really just stick to the plan of, hey, this is, I guess it wasn't that bad of a pushback, but it was the fact that they just haven't done it. And it was more of the fact that they only wanted to do it because it was grant related. And that's what their motivation finally to sit down and do a budget was. But it wasn't the fact of just like, I'm telling them the details of have we thought about the stationery? Have we thought about the other additional fees that we're going to have to pay for? Going to Walgreens, getting those things scanned, or whatever the case, it's still going to cost. And that's where the pushback really does occur. Like, well, I don't need a miscellaneous for $100. $100 can go to a bounce house or whatever the case. They have more direct intentions of the presentation vision of it. But because I'm such a behind the scenes person, I'm thinking of every nook and cranny and even possibility of things going wrong. I put that per diem in play of possibility, and that is another thing that I do get pushback on, just because nobody wants to plan for the what ifs. They rather plan for just everything going right. And so those are the moments where I'm thinking of everything. And that's the part of my accounting background really comes in play.
So, what do you do when you're working with a client who's won the grant, they're working through the budget on what they've said they're going to comply with, and then something changes? How do you deal with that?
So it has occurred sometimes very much because one of my clients actually it was a natural disaster. Their building kind of got hit by, not kind of, there was debris by a tornado. And so that was a thing where they recently had a whole side of the wall that there was a mural they recently paid for. And so that was a thing where like almost they felt like the money was wasted in a past grant that they were ready to reorchestrate a new grant to go towards something in the past that they're like they wanted to be fixed up. And that was one of those moments where zoning them back in on the purpose of the money. We had this budget already planned out. I remind them this budget was for this. the per diem element, maybe we can delegate maybe 250 or whatever the case, 1,000 here because we plan for the what ifs. But that element of we still have a play in action. The grantors still want to know that money was put in the right place. And that's where I kind of stick to the plan. It is hard. I feel like sometimes people definitely have those who have a nonprofit, they have a big heart. And that's hard to kind of fight the heart with the mentality of the reality of things.
Interesting. I want to go back to something you said earlier when you were talking about budgets that are in fantasy land. What's the difference between a grounded budget and one that's in fantasy land, as you described? Like, what does that mean?
Yes, so I actually do sometimes, those who have that fantasy world will create a manifestation budget. And so if they wanted to go there, we can go there. So that fantasy world is, if they have never done a gala, they don't know what that really costs for that either. And so, but that's in their fantasy. Like, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want to create all the things that they've seen from another organization, but they're not yet at that level. But so that's when I'm putting in play that fantasy. We're putting staff in play. We're putting more things on record of like what that really looks like in totality, still grounding them, but letting them explore what that really looks like. And then we get down to the total, what those expenses are, and we're like, oh, that's 20,000 more than we realized. Okay, let's bring it back to reality. This is current right now. Maybe the next grant can be focused on what you're talking about, and that's where that fantasy is absolutely something we can all achieve. But I'm also making sure that they can achieve it with the money on hand and not just wasting necessarily the money that is coming in.
Okay, okay, this is helpful. Actually, on that train of thought, I'd like to take a step back up when for grant writers that are creating budgets and it might be their first time and they're going through the motions of this. Can you walk through what it should look like for a grant writer who's doing this? Like where do they start when they see an application and they're starting to prepare to submit an application and they need to include a budget in that, obviously. How do they begin the process of going through writing the grant while also keeping the budget in mind and working with other teams to assemble the information that they need? What is the best way that they should go about that based on your experience?
I would say break it down for the project in hand. And so if it is their first fundraiser, thinking about the money possibilities of coming in. So if there's extra donations, preparing for those extra donations outside of just a grant, outside of a sponsor, having a line item for all aspects of potential money coming in. Outside of not just that one central location. Maybe we're selling popcorn for the first time. That is going to be income. And so I want that to be sectioned completely separate from when we start talking about all the expenses. So the expenses are what's the money going out. And with that thought process, we're thinking about even for the popcorn, we had to pay for that. We had to pay for the oil that goes into that. So those things are still being put into a line item as well. So even if you have somebody coming from out of town, you, like I said, everybody has a big heart when it comes to nonprofit. You want to put them in a hotel, all those things that sounds really great, but do we have it on a line item? Do we plan for travel? Do we plan for a hotel? Those are things we would want to continue to add. I always enjoy going to the fantasy world with my clients because it does exist. They have a big picture in mind, especially if in their first few years, not necessarily fully in it just yet. They don't know what the big picture for them just yet is. And so I'll let that kind of float into this world too. So like, oh, you talked about a DJ here. Maybe we need to pay for a DJ at this next event. Slowly integrating that fantasy world into what they're doing currently is another thing. I will put a line item on there. Maybe we don't do it just yet, but we also have to think about tablecloths, food, literally the essential and utilities, keeping the lights on. Did we think about the insurance? Certain things like that. That's all money coming out, and the accounting point of the accounting brain never stops. Like I'm always in a spreadsheet point of view, so I am thinking line item per thing. So I will say that it's just me, especially, but also just on grant writers coming in. When you're thinking about a budget, understand that breaking even is okay. Having money come in and money go out and not necessarily making something is still okay. And I think that's the other side effect. A lot of people just want to always be in the green. Just want to be on the other side of it. They don't want to be in the red, and that's the scary part. But breaking even is just as okay, especially if you're using grant funded situation. They want to see that money being used, not necessarily just sitting in your bank account. They want to see every penny that's being given to you put to purpose.
So it sounds like the budget is a living document that the grant writer should be using rather than just something that you include as like an appendices to the application.
Yeah. So I have like one of my main clients that I have had for the last 3 years. We have per project, per fundraiser, but then we have an annual budget just as much. And that's seeing that money going in and out for payroll or whatever the case may be.
Okay, that's great. And then working cross-functionally with other departments. If a grant writer is submitting the application, they've got the award from the grant. What does their relationship need to be with the other departments to make sure that everything is handled the way it should be?
Yes, I love that question. I think communication is such a big thing when it comes to money that it should never be underestimated. So making that consistent communication of a monthly up to date of money going in and money going out, as well as making sure that the grant the grant writer itself is prepared with the next thing that is going to be coming. So if you have a department that's already planning for the next event, those should be already in conversation with the grant writer. Same case for the executive director. If he's going out of town or he or she's going out of town for intentions to network, those should also be like, do they have everything they need? Do they have the paperwork? Do they have flyers? Those are things that also can integrate back into that grant world way more than people realize. And that's the other thing that I think with my background, just thinking about this, I realize there's a lot more in play than I realized, but it just makes a big difference in how you approach every aspect of grant writing. So if you have to go to another department, that communication, if they've never seen your face, they don't know your name, that is a big problem right there. We always need to be the main ones in communication with the full house, especially when things happen, especially natural disasters, whatever the case. If we're not a team, it will show also in how that budget and everything gets handled when it comes in or out the door.
Okay, that's great. And do budgets look different when submitting grant applications when it's an unrestricted or capacity building grant versus a non-capacity building grant?
Yes and no. So I say yes because of the details that you're sharing. A lot of times, the details in the smaller capacity aren't as necessary, but having them makes a big difference in the long run. And then the element of just saying no is because overall you're giving a picture of what the intentions are behind it. So that's the kind of yes and no aspect in play.
Got it. So an unrestricted grant, it does not mean that there doesn't have to be a budget and you can
Hmm.
spend it however you want it. You still need to have
Something, yeah.
all your line. Yeah, you have to have something. On that same line of thinking, there is a lot of not misunderstandings, but different ways of thinking about capacity building grants. Is there a myth that you'd love to bust once and for all around capacity building grants and building budgets? What's something that just irks you and you would love to put to rest?
That the application's asking for too much or that it's going to take too long. Like I think some people are more intimidated by the application process than actually getting something done. And I always tell people it is a big word problem. We all went through math at some point, and I treat every application like a word problem. You have to read it all, get the details they're asking for, and get to the intention of what they want. A lot of times people overestimate just getting started. And that's the part where I feel like you're going to miss out on a lot of money if you're waiting for that good time or the right application or whatever the case. A lot of times people don't realize you're practicing at the same time, putting that practice in on the application or putting yourself in that placement. You're practicing for the yes that comes through.
Interesting. And for a non-finance person, I relate to this next question, but budgets can be intimidating for non-finance folks, but we know that they're a big part of winning proposals, as you've been saying. Do you have a rule of thumb for folks that don't live and breathe in the spreadsheets like you do? Do you have a rule of thumb for translating the program needs into a budget that funders will support,
Rule of thumb,
or
I would
advice that you
say
give?
that's I'm like I have to think outside my world. My fiance is definitely in your boat, so I feel like I talk this. I have to switch it sometimes.
Of course.
But the non-financial point of view, I would say approaching every situation with a plan is the whole point of a budget. And as well as just not thinking about necessarily the numbers, but knowing the category that something is about to be delegated to. If that's your office supplies or if that's just admin alone, I think just knowledge of where something is going going to bring you just as much power of seeing that spreadsheet for me. I think number wise, it is harder to think about it and be more realistic. It's some of those times where money kind of gets lost in the sauce because you're not paying attention to the numbers, and it can move around if you're not paying attention. But that's the reason why you need somebody with the numbers point of view.
Great. Um, Now, if there's looking ahead, if there was something that you could change about how nonprofits approach building budgets for grant applications, what would you want to see changed?
I would love to see more video applications. I've seen it change, I think, a lot since AI came out with the possibilities of people can become whoever they are with AI.
Hmm.
But I enjoy the physical seeing who's getting the application or seeing who actually is behind it. I think that makes a bigger difference than sometimes the story that you're putting on paper.
That's a great answer. And looking back to all your early days in grant writing and nonprofit finance and how far you've come, is there a piece of advice you wish you could give yourself and folks like you back then at that stage?
Yes. So I tell people that my grant writing background actually starts with me doing scholarships. And that started with me in junior year of high school. And that was not an option. I'm the third child, the last child, and my dad was making sure that less money was coming out of his pocket. So my background also comes from, I think, a different way of approaching because I'm also debt free from student loans because I was able to do the same concept of what I'm doing now. And that's really crafting the story that makes the most sense to somebody, a complete stranger, um, that wouldn't know you the next day after this application. But that story alone or how you write it is such a significant difference in the outcome of what you're actually going to see in the bank account. And I think a lot of times people kind of get more interested in the larger numbers of doing application that's worth a whole bunch of money. But I think even getting started and narrowing it down and practicing with the smaller ticket micro grants, those exist for a reason. People underestimate 10 or 20 of those can equal up just the same as one application. And also, those you're practicing. You're never going to get yeses every single time. And accepting the no now will also give you a lot more less ego to pop later. Because I think for me, that first application was that $50,000 grant for my client, and it did put me on a different pedestal because one, my percentages was really great because I was only putting out so many grants, but also I was getting mostly yeses. But once I put out more grants, that percentage changes, but also my confidence went a lot higher.
Interesting. You bucked the stereotype of how people think about finance professionals. You're very much in the numbers and you know the numbers, but you also seem to have attuned to the psychology behind the work that you do
Yeah.
and how to motivate people and stuff. So that's great. Deanna, this has been a great conversation. I want to be respectful of your time, but to end things off, if people want to learn more about you, your work, and potentially connect, where can they go?
Yes, so they can find me on all platforms under Budgets by Joy, and that's Budgets with an S and Joy with an I. My mom made sure I was different, so I bring joy to finances, and that's my goal. And it really is something I realize is my purpose. And I'm found on all platforms: YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and pretty much anywhere you can find me. I am there. My goal is really to make accessible options for financial literacy to be normalcy for all of us. And then also, I have a ebook out now that also educates young professionals. I say you can literally get this at 16, 22, but you're getting honestly an education on financial literacy background that I feel like we should have been taught in school. But basics of what is scholarships, what is a resume, and how to present yourself in a professional manner in the work world. I think we didn't have enough of that when we were growing up, and I want to make that difference.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. This is a great conversation.
Thank you.